7C, approve first reading of Knox County Board of Education Policy J-210, Harassment of Students as amended.
Motion by Ms. Horn, a second by Reverend Butler. And we do have some public forum speakers on this item.
Yes.
And we can go to discussion. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have 3 public forum speakers on this item. Megan, I want to have you come. I apologize for not pronouncing your last name. I am sorry.
That's a long one.
And but Megan, if you'll state your name, county of residence, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Great, thank you. Good evening, my name is Megan Haselschwerdt, Knox County resident, mom to 2 future KCS students, and I'm an associate professor at Child and Family Studies at the University of Tennessee. No one understands the desire to get policy, language, and alignment quite like an academic. I understand the seemingly logical decision to strike actual or perceived gender and sexual orientation from the list and replace it with sex to align with some of the upstream policies. I recognize that the Harassment of Students policy affirmatively states that KCS schools do not tolerate harassment for any reason, which at least in policy includes gender identity and sexual orientation. But I think it's important to consider our country's socio-political and historical backdrop is particularly vital to consider when deciding to strike gender identity and sexual orientation from the truncated list, replacing it with sex. 510 anti-LGBT bills were introduced and 84 bills were passed in 2023. 10 of those were in Tennessee. We're leading the way in anti-LGBT legislation, particularly against youth. Most of these targeted education and gender-affirming care. When it comes to LGBT youth, politicians have decided that science and medicine are not relevant to legislative decision-making, as every single reputable pediatric medicine, child development, and family science organization, including the National Council on Family Relations, to which I belong, stand by the overwhelming evidence of the essentiality of providing gender-based evidence care for transgender youth. It's important to also note that sex and gender, while often conflated, are actually quite distinct concepts, and sexual orientation even more so. So the replacement of sex doesn't really address kind of the 2 others that were addressed. Approximately 10% of U.S. youth identify as LGBTQ+, including the 1.5% who identify as transgender. Despite their small numbers, peers, adults, and legislators seem motivated to make these youth's lives more difficult. 84% of transgender youth were bullied or harassed at school based on a recent survey from this past year of the country. Suicide ideation and completed suicide rates are exponentially higher for transgender and other LGBT youth when compared to cisgender and gender majority youth. Their risks of all sorts of mental and physical health and academic outcomes align much more closely with their straight, heterosexual, and cisgender peers when they have supportive parents, peers, teachers, and school districts that explicitly affirm them. Transgender and gender and sexual minority youth can and do thrive. We have ample research that demonstrates this, but the community context, particularly our policies, are essential in acknowledging their existence, their reality, and naming and boldly standing up against anti-LGBT harassment. By stripping out gender identity and sexual orientation from this policy, you would be doing the opposite. Replacing them with sex is not the same thing. As elected officials, you have the unique opportunity to contribute to a better school context for all youth, especially the small percentage of youth and their families who remain under legislative attack. Legislative attacks that will shorten the lives of our young people. Words matter, the meaning behind them matter, what we include as exemplars and policy lists indeed matter. I urge you to stick with the current policy and keep gender identity and sexual orientation named in J-210. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.